All right, so today we'll be talking about a very important topic, um, and a very important chapter in the Bible, or in this case in the Torah, which is Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. And we're going to emphasize the first part of the text where it states, "And God said, Let us plural make man in our image plural after our likeness." And so we're going to be discussing that today. I pray that the this teaching or this video that the Most High will be glorified in His truth, and I pray whoever is watching this will be edified and blessed as well. We're going to use the Hebrew as well because I believe as you can see, the Hebrew is on the left side, and you have the translation on the right side. And I believe there's some valuable clues, if you will, in the Hebrew that may not be highlighted as much in the translation to ascertain this particular topic. Because the question at hand, or the $1 million question, is who is the us? Who is the our? This proves this proves that, and it doesn't. And you're going to see that once we read things in context, that although 26 uh, alone is ambiguous because it does not specify who's the us or our. But when we read the verses in context, you're going to see that it is not actually ambiguous. And to me, and from my opinion, that it is very clear who's the us and who is the our. I don't know if I previously stated this before in another video, but I'm just going to just reiterate it very quickly that there are 31 verses in this chapter, and prior to 26, verses 1 through 25 all refer to God in a singular sense. So verse 25 says God made the beast. Verse 24, and God said. Verse 22, and God blessed them, and so on. Verse 20, and God said, let the water swarm. I mean, not to be redundant, I can go through all of this, but for sake of time, you kind of get the point when I'm pointing out that if you want to be honest, that verses 1 even to the very first verse says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, referring to the creator. One person alone did the creation. But when we get to 26, we're introduced to the idea, or perhaps on the surface to the idea, I should say, that there's actually more than one person around because of the us and the our, which are plural pronouns. Okay. However, what makes this more intriguing, or makes at least me scratch my head initially even more, is that the subsequent verses from 27 to 31 refer God back to in a singular sense. Okay. It says God created man in his own image, and God blessed them, and God said, and verse in the last verse, and God saw that everything he had made, behold, it was very good. So as you can see here, context is going to be key to understanding what verse 26 is saying, and really what it is not saying, I should say. That is the key. The context is going to demonstrate, in my opinion, categorically, to state what it's really not saying versus what it is saying. All right. Now, many people who kind of harp on, and again, this is used as a proof text in a way, to me, that is done in a very misleading way, because they would ignore verses 1 through 25, ignore verses 27, 31. And when I mean ignore, completely do not consider or factor it in. There's one thing, I don't believe in ignoring any verse, essentially. But the problem is that when we put more weight above another verse, so hey, I'm gonna put verse 26 above 27, or I'm gonna put verse 25 above 28. That's not reading. Why would you do that? The only reason why you do that is if you're trying to make the scriptures say something that is really not saying, or essentially you're using it in a way to validate a certain particular belief that you've already had prior to reading, essentially what was taught to you. Okay, because if you read it objectively, you would see that in verse 27 it says something completely different. And God said, let us, and we're going to go into Hebrew in a second. It said, God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness. Okay, cool. Verse 27, and God created man in his own image, and the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Now, did God change his mind initially by saying, hey, we're going to create man in our image? Or when he said, let us, all right, guys, we're going to create man in our image. And then he decided to say, I'm going to create it in my own image by, it's stated in verse 27, and God created man in his own image. No, that's not what happened. And I'm going to show that in the Hebrew. Now, one other thing I want to highlight real quickly. In Hebrew, there's no upper or lower case, but the translators are in this case emphasize the word his and he here for a reason, and you're going to see why. So we're going to read it in the Hebrew here. It says, Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam betzlamo. Okay, so let's parse this real quickly. Now, Vayivra, the root word is the same word, bara, that you'll find here in the first verse, where it says, Bereshit bara, same word here. Verse 26. Sorry, verse 27. And if you watch my, I had made a video about whether Elohim is singular or plural, because I'm just going to not go indefinite, but just wanted, if you haven't watched it, the Elohim is the plural word, but bara is singular. And so Elohim now should be understood to be singular. So it's no longer plural. Not only that is no longer plural, it is a masculine singular verb. And so it literally states, and he created. So when we get to verse 27, you have the va here, and he created. Who is the he? Elohim, the power, God created et ha'adam, which is man, betzlamo, in his image. If verse 26 was truly plural, in it by itself, it would state this. Versus saying betzlamo, it would state betzlamu. It will be in their image. You see? That's why we cannot isolate verses and ignore other verses. And the only reason why you would do that, again, is to support a particular narrative. You will go to Genesis 3 and you will say, hey, it says, it says man has become like one of us. Essentially, you cherry pick certain verses, you put emphasis on other verses, and you ignore other verses completely. And unfortunately, that's how most people are taught. Essentially, growing up, that's how I was taught, unbeknownst to me. I just thought because we're reading out of the Bible that I am reading. No, I was reading from the perspective how they wanted me to read it, which is different from you reading it objectively. There's a complete difference from reading objectively versus reading it from a biased point of view, whether you know or whether you don't know, unbeknownst to you. All right. So then we have the latter part of the verse, where it says Bezalem, which is in the image of Elohim bara oto. Then we have the word bara again, which emphasizes he, in the image of God, he created. Okay, masculine singular verb here, which is so important. So that go ahead and cuts down the argument of a plurality because of the verbs that are being used. The verbs are key in understanding this topic or any other topic as it relates to the scriptures. Latter part of the verse, the third part, and the last part, it says Zakah unkava bara, again, otem, male and female created he them. That's why they highlighted capital H. They're trying to show you what the Hebrew is saying. So as if you're reading the Hebrew, you have to understand it as one person. So man was created in the image of God, he alone, singular. So when we get to verse number 26, when it's referring to, when he's saying let us or the our, this is referring to God. And this is a very simplified way of me explaining this, because essentially we have the word here, the Hebrew Elohim, which is powers, essentially, right? And in English, the noun that we use to describe the power is God, essentially. We cannot define God, but that's just the word that we use for God. But essentially, we cannot define God. There's certain things that we can define. We can define water. We know the elements that make up water. We can define things, but God cannot be defined. So sometimes if I don't know if whoever's listening of the word or the phrase majestic plurality of God. This is the vastness of God. Just like the word, Hebrew word for water is Mayim, like the ocean, the vastness of water. So when God is saying, let us make man in our image, it's the vastness of God that he's saying, the majestic plurality of God that cannot be defined. The essence of everything is God. The earth is God, the land is God, the herb is God, man is God, because he created everything. So the vastness of God. But he clearly stipulates that in the verse 27, God created man in his own image. If this was more than one person doing the creating, let's go down to verse 31. This will be the nail in the coffin, in my opinion. And we're going to read it in the Hebrew. Vare Elohim et kol ashri asa, which is, and the power God saw. He saw. Et kol ashri asha. Everything, here the translation, everything that he had made. Asa is the singular verb. It's not plural. So I hope whoever's watching can see that it's very important to look at the context. Context alone would tell you that, hey, it would be wrong for me to ignore verses 1 to 25 and verses 27 to 31. But even if you did that alone, when you looked at it in the Hebrew, you can't get away. Vaya'as Elohim et Chayat. God made et, the beasts of the land or the field or the earth. This is one person doing all the speaking in verses 1 through 31, and it's done through the third person. One person all through Genesis chapter 1. From the very first line, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created, he created, bara, masculine singular, the heavens and the earth. This is not more than one person at all. And I'll challenge anybody who would say differently, with all due respect, if it could be proven out in the Hebrew. All right. Thanks for watching. I hope this clarifies. And I don't know everything. My opinion is always up for debate. Man's opinion is always up for debate. No matter whoever you listen to, is at the end of the day, you're dealing with a man. You're dealing with an imperfection. However, it's still not an excuse for us to be ignorant, and we should be striving to walk in truth as closely as possible as we know it. It doesn't mean that we're going to ascertain everything, but in this particular subject matter, who is the us is answered in verse 27 clearly. Shalom.